Have you ever wondered about life's biggest questions? Like, why am I here? What happens when we die? Or what else is out there? Well, we have, and we love to talk about it. And if you're listening, we think you probably do too. I'm Robyn.
And I'm Karen. And we've spent our lives searching for those answers. And we're seekers just like you.
We'll be talking to some of the most fascinating spiritual teachers, healers, and scientists, and showing you how you can use some of their spiritual practices for yourself.
We'll also be sharing stories of other seekers to motivate you to live your fullest life.
And we'll be translating it all, so the spiritual stuff won't feel so out there.
So if you're curious, get ready to rediscover why we're here together.
Hi, everyone. It's Robyn.
And Karen.
And we're here to talk about our own past life experiences that we had with Michelle Brock recently.
We've gotten such great feedback from you all about the interview that we did with Michelle. And Robyn and I were talking about it afterwards and thought that it might be fun for us to share a play-by-play version of the experience that we had in our own past life regressions.
They were life-changing. They really have stuck with us. They are so vivid in our minds. And part of that is what Michelle brings up in our conversation with her, is that they make you feel something. And because you are so tied to that feeling with these images, it stays with you. And we're going to tell you all about it.
And the coolest part, I think, for all of you is to understand that it's not a scary process. I think that's a question that's come up quite a bit of, what do I do? Do I have to be in a meditative state? Am I put under? I think when we talk you through how we went through the experience, you'll have a better sense of what to expect. So maybe we should start there.
So this was actually at the end of January, before the whole pandemic was a thing in the United States. I actually was in New York for several days. Part of our trip was having this experience. So I just want to set the stage in terms of timing and where we were.
That's right. So Robyn and I show up at Michelle's apartment, which is in a beautiful part of New York. It's such a cool vibe when you walk in. Michelle is a personality in her own right, as you saw, and made us feel really, really at home and welcome. And then as we got ready to do the process, the first thing she did was really walk us through what to expect. I had been through a past life regression before, so I was just so eager. And I think Robyn might have been just a little bit more.
I was kind of a wreck. And I realized that it was really just a deep meditation. And so for anybody that has thought about getting a regression and had been nervous about the hypnosis, I can tell you, as someone who is claustrophobic, who is somewhat scared of giving over any sort of control to anybody, I didn't feel that way at all. And we'll talk a little bit more about that.
And I have a picture or two to share that we can probably put up.
Yes,
so that
you do.
Really, the procedure is very simple. You really just lay on a couch. There was a blanket in case it was chilly. A candle was lit. And then Michelle slowly started talking Robyn through a process. So Robyn, why don't you talk about what that was?
Yeah. For everyone listening, when you're going through some sort of process that is involving energy or involving spirit, it is important to have somebody kind of bless the space. And so I know it's very important to Michelle that her space is always saged. It feels clear. She's really particular in where she will do these types of regressions. She won't do it just anywhere. For instance, she would not come to my hotel and do it in my room because she can't be sure she's clearing the space enough. Michelle has a very soothing, guided meditation voice. She went through this meditation and then she started to take me into a little bit of a deeper meditation. So it was a little bit longer and she was giving me steps to kind of take me deeper into my subconscious.
That's right. It's just so gradual where you picture a beautiful staircase and you take one step and she totally walks you from one step to the next, all the way down to the bottom, to the foot of the stairs. And then you are asked to gaze out to your most beautiful scene, whatever comes to you. For me, it was a beautiful ravine. It looked like the Swiss Alps. And there was a beautiful river running through it. And there was a rose garden on the side and a beautiful bench to sit down on. And it was very serene and peaceful. What does yours look like, Robyn?
Yeah. And for me, she calls it your sanctuary space, which I love. And I want to make one note. She explained this process before we actually started it. And when she said the word sanctuary space, I thought to myself, then I wonder what mine will be. Maybe it's going to be this like beautiful, very white, clean. I was starting to visualize something that it didn't end up being at all. What I saw was actually myself as a young Buddhist monk sitting on a dock, looking out at this beautiful water with these specific types of trees. And there were some sort of mountains in the distance. And for me, I was so peaceful. I kept going in and out of actually seeing the monk and then being in the monk. And so seeing through the eyes of the monk. What Michelle likes to say to me is that I got a bonus life because she thinks that I was actually a Buddhist monk in one of my lifetimes. And that must be where I was most peaceful.
I feel the same way about the scene that I saw. I didn't see myself as you did, but I literally I felt I had been to that place before. And I think the next part of the process too was even better, because what she did at that point was really anchor you in the moment with the next part of the process.
Yes.
And that is going to a door. You were to open the door and be in a place within this lifetime. It was an earlier part of your life. And so for me, when I opened the door, the first thing I was asked to do by Michelle was to look at my feet. And my feet had white, like Ked sneakers. And I realized immediately that I was in the bedroom of my house when I was a little kid. I was in third grade. It was a house that I had lived in years and years ago. But I knew where I was in that moment. And I was in that moment. I was that little girl. I was in that room. I was looking at my desk at some work that my mother had wanted me to do that I didn't want to do. It was like so much in the present moment. And I knew that the moment was significant for me because it was a moment in my early life when I was given a choice to do something that was towards my purpose. And I was afraid. I was afraid to do it. My mom was offering me this opportunity to be part of a contest, a writing contest. And I was terrified to do it. So it brought me right back to that moment in time and all the feelings of a little girl and of the fear of making a life choice, which I thought was really significant for me. What was your first?
I mean, not that I knew what to expect for you, but I was really stunned by that and how obviously relevant it was. And what I think the other important part of what Michelle is doing when she takes you to that childhood memory. There's a reason we are both shown what we're shown, because it's going to impact the other scenes in other past lives that were shown to help us with something in our current life now. It was really moving to hear that whole experience. And it was so detail oriented.
It was amazing how I could just see, and I'm closing my eyes because I can see it right now, which is why it's so vivid in my mind. I can see the shag carpet of my bedroom and the bedspread and the Partridge Family records and the record player. I was really transported back to that time. And you're right. For me, if you were to ask me, it wasn't a pivotal moment that I remember. But that's
what you were shown.
It was very significant.
Which will make sense as we keep going. For me, my most significant memory in my life, which ended up being shown to me, was the night that my father passed away. And so when I went through that doorway and I looked down and I saw my sneakers, my little feet at the time, and I saw what I was wearing, I could feel what day it was in the summer in Chicago in July. I knew what night it was. And I could
tell in your voice when you walked, the minute you opened the door, you knew where you were, and you knew.
I did.
The moment you were stuck.
And I know it can make me cry right now because I know how scared I was, because I knew what was going on when my dad had come back to my house after being at a neighbor's house and not feeling well and being sick and being a caretaker at the moment until I went to get my mother, and just the fear that you could, I immediately went back to it. And I think what Karen's saying is she could hear it in my voice during this regression. I know that was shown to me because that was such a significant part of not only my childhood and helping me shape the rest of my life, but it's so significant for right now because I truly believe that had to happen, as horrible and as tragic And as sad as it was, it had to happen in order for me to be doing this right now, talking to Karen and helping to wake up so many people.
So then I think at that point, Michelle asks a lot of questions. Like, she's with you the whole time, which is really wonderful. It's not like you feel very disconnected from her voice. You definitely know that she's there with you. And as she said, when we did the interview with her, she actually does see some of the things that we see, which is also very helpful because it helps guide the right questions to be asked so that you don't feel fearful, you don't feel alone, you don't feel lost. So that was so helpful. And yeah. She asked the right questions so that you walk out of that experience with that understanding, which is what you just said, Robyn, which is, why was I shown this? There was a reason for me being shown that. And it's interesting too, because as you're in the experience, it's such a duality of having your present understanding in that sense. That conscious part of your understanding is still there, and yet you are merged with this past soul person that you are. And that's really where the magic is, I think, because it really allows you to comprehend that experience in a different way. You still feel it, but you're comprehending it with that adult perspective.
That's a really good way of putting it.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting.
It does. And I really also want to say that there's so many people that I talk to that have gone through it and they feel at first like they're making things up. So I want to just say that at the top, entering this part where we're going to talk about what we saw and what we experienced, because you think you're making it up at first, but you aren't. And I think that's very important. And then the other part is that I know some of my friends who've tried this. At first, when they get into the experience, they kind of see nothing. It's not until they take a moment, trust Michelle, and trust the experience, but then images start coming. And again, they're not made up. They are part of your subconscious.
No, that is such a great point, because when you go to the next door and you really don't know, like at least with your child or with a past memory, you know, okay, well, I kind of know what it could possibly be. But in this case, you're going to that door and you have no idea. My brain froze for a moment, I think, like, oh my God.
That's such a good way of putting it.
What am I going to be? You don't know where you're going to be. Could you be in a prison? Could you be out at sea on a boat? You don't know where your feet are actually going to be. But in my case, it was very interesting. I looked and I knew the minute I opened the door, I knew what I was going to see. And I looked down at my feet and they were really beautiful slippers, like customized kind of quilted slippers, fancy slippers that you would see probably in the 1700s. I wasn't in the United States. I was somewhere overseas in a beautiful, looked like a Scottish countryside or a British countryside. I looked and I knew that because the room that I was in, it looked like it was in a big mansion or castle. And I looked out and I was looking down and I saw my father get out of a carriage that was, a horse-drawn carriage. And I knew he was coming up and I was getting ready for a party and I was dressed in this beautiful gown, with like the hoop skirt. And I couldn't quite see myself, but I recognized myself in sort of weird way. And I knew I was going to this party and I didn't want to go because the reason I was going was it was a matchmaking kind of occasion. I remember feeling that sense of, I don't want to go. I don't want to do this. And knowing that my father really wanted me to find a suitor because my mother had passed when I was younger, who happened to have been my grandmother. I knew it was my grandmother. And he was anxious for me to find a life. And
well, can I just say, and for those who haven't seen it, you need to watch Karen's reading with Lisa Nitskin, who talks all about her grandmother from this lifetime. So I know that's who you're referring to.
Yeah. So anyway, I went to the party and as I'm standing there, there's a long line of knights. And immediately I recognized my husband in this lifetime. He was standing right in front of me. And I was like, okay, this is going to be okay. I'm going to have a great time. And I kind of saw where my life was going to go. Michelle stopped me at that point and said, that's great. Now I want you to go forward in time in that lifetime to a future memory.
Yeah, another significant time in that life.
That's right. And I immediately went to a place where I was lying in a bed and my husband now and then was there with my daughter now and then. And I had just given birth to my son. and I was dying in childbirth. And my last memory was of the three of them, my poor husband with the baby and my daughter there, and leaving them behind. And it's such a significant memory for me because in this lifetime, the exact same thing happened to me when I gave birth to my son, and I almost died, but I didn't. And I think that was so telling for me to see that we were a part of a family that had reincarnated together, but also that I had in this lifetime the significant purpose of sticking around and finishing out that family story. So there are almost no words to explain what seeing something like that can feel like.
As somebody who was in the room, you could feel that energy. You could feel what you'd gone through. It was extremely moving. Before you went to the next life, isn't that when Michelle asked you, what were you supposed to learn from that life?
What it really taught me was that I came back wanting to be with them and to really finish the purpose that I had intended with them. When I passed, I felt that same feeling as when I almost
Wow.
In this lifetime, because it was that feeling of just the draining of the life energy out of you.
Wow.
In this life, I think it was again a choice. I had the choice to not stay or stay. And in this case, I think it was clear in my soul that no, I'm not going to do that again. I want to stay here and live through this experience because, as it turned out, I was very needed.
Yes.
My son had issues right after that. I mean, I really, really needed to stick around. And so I think at a soul level, I knew that, whereas in this past life, I may not have made the same choice or even had the same choice. In this lifetime, that lifetime became so significant because of the similarity of that death and this near-death experience.
Well, that's why that was shown to you, for sure.
All right, so now you tell.
Okay. What I was shown when I went through that first door and I looked down, I saw these white shoes that were definitely female. Immediately, what came to my mind was actually a time frame. I was in the 1800s. I had a great big white dress with this huge petticoat and everything else underneath. I had a parasol and I was walking around what looked to me like a square in Savannah, Georgia. And I was a Southern belle. Michelle asked, do you live here? And I said, I don't live right here, but I live near here. And she said, well, let's go to your home. I was in a horse and buggy. And as we were going down this dirt road, I realized that I lived on a plantation. I lived on a cotton plantation. And I saw that I lived in this tremendous white house with columns. And I remember Michelle saying, do you own slaves? And I did. And that was bizarre to me. And it was, I think when you said there was this conscious part of you, and then there's the subconscious. The conscious part of me was extremely upset that is what I was seeing. My knowing was that in this past life, I was part of that. That just doesn't represent anything about who I am in this life. So it was strange to me and it was a huge plantation. I'm like, what in the world is going on? And I felt like in that life, I actually was friends with my slaves, which again, saying that all of that sounds just wrong and weird to me in this lifetime. So
the thing was, when you were in the experience, you were very much describing matter-of-factly what you saw. So that was very clear to you. And then there would be these interspersed moments of confusion. So you're right. You were kind of ebbing and flowing between being really there, being really present in that moment of where you were and observing and describing everything that you saw. And then your consciousness.
Yeah, it was strange. That part was strange to me. And then we got to the house and Michelle asked me, do I have children? And all of a sudden I had 3 children. I had 2 boys and a girl. And the boys were my husband now, my uncle now, who's like my dad, and my daughter, Bella, who's obviously my daughter in this lifetime. And then I saw my husband, and my husband was my father in this lifetime who passed away. In those moments, and I could see then that I was very much a socialite. I had lots of parties and friends and lived this life in society. And at this time, that is, again, bizarre for me to understand, this whole idea of owning slaves. And yet at the same time, my person there just was living. And so I enjoyed my life. It's one of those things that as a human in this life, when you look back at history, that's horrendous. But I had to learn from that experience. When I thought about my family and what I did in my day-to-day life, I was very happy and I didn't have many worries. And that was what I was supposed to learn in that lifetime. Interestingly, for me, Michelle did not take me to the last day of that life. She just took me to my next life.
Why don't you go to your next life?
Okay. When I went through this next door into another life, I was an old man and I was in a bed. I couldn't get out of the bed. And the only thing I can give you as an example of what I pictured were the grandparents from Willy Wonka that all lived in a bed, but I was by myself. But I was like in one of those, like a gown of some sort, in this bed, in this room that was like all brown wood. There was a fireplace and there was a fire going, but it was very dark and dingy-ish. And I was in Eastern Europe and it was in the 1600s and I couldn't move. What I said was I was riddled with arthritis and I was a curmudgeon. That was the other word that came to mind. I was just this angry old man. And when I say old, I think for the time I was old, I think I was around 60 or in my late 50s, which of course now is not old. But that was like how my body felt. When Michelle asked me more, I knew that I'd been a bookkeeper in a bookstore, not like a bookkeeper, like accountant. I was a bookkeeper in a bookstore. And I lost my wife when we were both very young. And when she asked me who my wife was, it was my daughter, Bella. And I never got over the loss of my wife. That loss turned into anger, which who knows if that fueled my arthritis or whatever, but I found no joy and no happiness. And I only exuded anger and a frustration with life. And so there I was living in that body. I'm sure I was dependent upon others because I couldn't move.
Does it make you feel though that life happened before your life in Savannah, right? So you left that life clearly. Who knows if you had another one in between, but potentially you left that life really doing a review saying, I don't want to do that again.
Yes.
And you opted for absolutely the opposite. You're a different gender. You're living in a place that's cultivating, that's got the family that is nurturing. Yes. So it's so interesting how
it is. And to be, I think what you said about being the different gender, it didn't even feel weird to me that I was a man. And I know we talked a lot about that with Michelle, but it's really something that if we all understood that we're different races, we're different genders, it doesn't matter. You're a soul living in a body, And that was very clear to me. It wasn't strange to me that I was a man. I just accepted that. And it was very much that I needed to learn how to get over loss, which I find very interesting. As you said, when I think about my life in Savannah, and as I think of my life now, I had loss at a young age in this lifetime. And while it wasn't my wife, it was my father, but I chose to have joy. So those lives definitely lined up in this lifetime and to teach me, okay, I have learned some of these lessons. There's so much more to learn, but those lessons are being lived in this lifetime. So I have another life, which we'll get to, but let's get to your second life that I still think about.
Well, and what else is so interesting too, before we even jump to that made me think when you were talking about your emotional feelings, you are still you are still observing while at the same time really being in this soul experience that you are visiting again. But the emotional level is so palpable, right? And it goes back to what you were saying before about that's how you know it's real. Because when I crossed in that lifetime where I didn't stick around, the sadness that hit me was so profound. And I was so sorry I had to leave them.
Yes. Oh my God. I remember you crying.
I'm not an easy crier.
No, and you really
And it's like with you too, when you were in both of those situations, you feel the emotion.
You do feel the emotion, and that emotion stays with you, but you don't feel physical pain. And I think that's important, right? So I knew I had arthritis and that I had pain, but I didn't feel that in the experience, just like you didn't feel yourself die, right?
In a way, it can take your fear away of death, the way that Michelle explained it, because
Absolutely.
if that's not what happens, it's
absolutely.
It's not so traumatic. You're sort of out of your body even before you die.
Thank you for bringing that up. It's really important.
So the next one.
Oh my goodness.
So when I opened the door, I looked at my feet and there were no shoes on my feet. And I knew pretty much right away that I was a Native American and that I was an Arapaho Indian. And I was really surprised that the word Arapaho came out of my mouth because I was searching for it at first. And it was so clear where I was. I knew that we had left Colorado and that we ended up in Wyoming, but it was just so clear what my identity was, which was so surprising to me. And I knew that less by what I was wearing, but by how I felt. I felt like I had been outside and I could smell the air and how much I loved the smell of being out in the wilderness. And as I was looking around, I was in a strange place, but it was a beautiful lake with pine trees all around, and it was growing late in the day. And as I looked over my shoulder, I realized that there were people with me. Not a lot of people. I would say a group of maybe about 20 or so, one of which was my grandmother. And I had this awful fear. And I knew that we had been on a long journey and that we had arrived at a place that was safe. And that through that journey, it was because we had left a place in Colorado where there was this terrible massacre, and that my father was head of the tribe and had been massacred in that event, and that I was the one responsible for leading those who were left out of that area to a safe space, which somehow I knew was Wyoming because it just had that beautiful, tranquil nature feeling about it. And my fear was because I knew I had the responsibility of taking care of these people and making sure that they were safe, and that I could sense that winter was coming quickly. And how was I going to care for them? I didn't feel I had the capability to be the leader. I didn't feel strong enough to be able to be the one to be entrusted with all of their lives. And so that was the feeling that I had. And
I mean, I have the chills when you talk about it. I do.
So,
I have the chills.
So real.
I have the chills, and it gives a whole other meaning to winter is coming from Game of Thrones. Let me just say.
So then Michelle asked me to fast forward to a next significant moment in my life. And this is where it was, again, made me teary-eyed, was I was an old, much, much older man. I was in the same place, same area, but it was my birthday. And there was a big bonfire and celebration going around and music. And there was a lot more people. And it showed me that they were celebrating my life and the fact that everyone had thrived and everyone had gotten through this time and was doing really well. And they were celebrating the fact that I was their leader. And I knew that I was close to the end of my days, but I felt such happiness, such joy, such pride that I was able to protect and make sure all of these people that I was entrusted with thrived and survived. And so my last moment again was passing, but again, it was that feeling of rising above this beautiful area and being celebrated and a life well lived. So it was, even just now, it just brings such joy to me because its symbol for me is so relevant of being up to a task, of being up to being able to lead, of being up to making sure that those who I love are cared for in this lifetime. So sticking around and making sure that they're all well and a life well lived.
Yes.
All right. So that was mine. Now, Robyn, let's talk about your last one, which is a biggie as well.
Yeah. And my last one, again, blew my mind. So when I went through the next door and I looked down, I wasn't wearing any shoes either. And I realized very quickly that I was also a man, and I was an African man. Now, I don't know what the time was, but I knew I was actually in Africa, and I was an African man, and I was wearing a sarong. I was ripped. I was a ripped African man, and I lived in a very small tribe. There were maybe 10 huts. The age that I was shown was somewhere in my late teens, and I was actually going to be getting married. And so I saw my wife, and my wife looked like Lupita Nyong'o. That's who I saw, but she was actually my sister in this lifetime. And I knew it was my sister. And I was so happy. I was a hunter. And so I saw myself really sharpening my spear and going on a hunt. And I was hunting wild boar. And I remember saying it, thinking, are there even wild boar in Africa? I have no clue. That's what I was doing. And then I saw myself with my tribe and my family. There was a lot of dancing. There was a lot of joy. And there was so much simplicity. It was all about just getting to the next day, surviving for the next day. But it was the joy that we had together. Then Michelle asked me to fast forward in that life. I had married. I was now maybe in my late 20s. So it wasn't that much. It was only about 10 years later. And I still was so happy. And we still had those same traditions in the tribe, and the tribe didn't get much bigger. At that time in the life that I was shown, I did go on a hunt, and I was actually killed by a wild boar, and I saw myself die. And again, it wasn't painful. And what I remember from when I passed was that I had lived a good life, even though it wasn't long in how we would all look at life. It was simple and it was full of joy. It comes down to enjoying the simple things in life, which are family, and that feeling like I can still feel myself dancing, which is still a big part of what I like to do for joy now. There was something in that energy that is so important. That was important then. It's important now. And I know I was with my sister too, which was actually very meaningful to me. So yeah, I was an African man, and I was in Uganda. Let me also point out, I knew that I was in Uganda, which I thought was interesting too. It was very clear that's where I was. So those were our lives, right? I ended up having 4 lives. You had 2. And then at the end of the experience, at the end of the regression, she takes us back to our sanctuary space. Karen, why don't you explain what happened? So after your second life, which was you as an Arapaho Indian, you then were taken back to your sanctuary space.
Yeah. And that was just as magical, because for me, my guardian angel came. I was sitting in this beautiful place again, in this beautiful bench. My guardian angel came and stood behind me. And my grandmother came and sat next to me on the bench. And my sister, who I lost 15 years ago now, came and she just sat down at my feet and put her head on my lap. And I literally felt the angel wings, do this big hug. And it was like my soul and my guides all giving me the recognition that I had gone through this experience. And I just sat there for a while. And then Michelle said, no, you should just stay. And it got very, very quiet. And that's when I almost drifted outside of myself. And I don't even know where I went, but I know that where I was the most peaceful, beautiful place that I had ever been. And the energy that came to me was there aren't even any words, but I felt the energy almost being downloaded on me. It was like a different energy vibe altogether. And it seemed like I sat on that bench or wherever I was for the longest time. So finally I came back, and Michelle walked me back and very gently, told me to open my eyes and explained to me that she kept me in that place on purpose for a while longer, because she felt that I was being downloaded with information, and that it was really important that I just really absorb all of that energy. It took me a while, I think, after even I came out of it to really come out of it.
There was energy that we couldn't explain in that room. And it was at least 20 minutes. We didn't know when you would come out of it. You were just so at peace.
And we'll explain later, there were so many flashes of things that kind of came and went.
Well, and I thought was really interesting was that Michelle said she's only had that happen a few times in her entire career, because she did kind of explain it as a Kundalini type of experience. And there was almost like a different frequency that was brought into your system.
It was so powerful for me.
And as for me too. So at the end of my experience, I went back to my sanctuary space, and at that point, I was in the monk's body, and I was sitting on that dock in this serenity, and my dad came and sat down next to me, and it was beautiful. I felt like I was reunited with a soulmate, and I felt all my other guides around me, and my dad just started talking to me, and he told me that I was on my right path, and this was all for a reason. And he really did explain what I'd been shown and why. And it was very much like a coming home, and it was hard to leave. I allowed myself to be in a certain space and have a real conversation. Even though I was in this monk's body, I knew that my soul is the same soul that was in the monk's body, is the same soul that's here, and how connected from an energetic level I am with my dad. And I felt so safe and supported and loved by all of the guides and energy around me. And that has stayed with me. And I go to that safe and sanctuary space every day. I think of myself as that young Buddhist monk sitting. I've never been to Bali or wherever I was. Indonesia, somewhere. I don't know where. That's what comes to mind, but I've never been there, but I can picture it, like really picture it in 3D. So it was magical.
But I also think what's so special about the experience now in retrospect, for anybody who thinks, why do I have to look in the past? Past is the past. What is the significance? For me, the messages that I received out of those experiences, going back to what you said in the very beginning, Robyn, was so important to anchor in my mind what it is that I need to do in this lifetime. These people that you're surrounded with, they're your soul pod. They're here to be with you, to be part of your journey, to protect you, to nurture you. And if you can recognize the messages that you get out of those past life experiences, they can open up a whole new level of self-understanding and confidence that you are on your path, and that you go from one lifetime to the next to the next. It can take a little bit of that pressure off of like, oh my gosh, I've got to do everything in this lifetime.
And that leads me to two things. One is that we're also, for me, I was a man in 3 of the lives that I was shown, right? I was a different gender. I was a different race. And it really does also say something about knowing that we are all one, right? We are all equal. There's, I love that Michelle has said, if everyone did a past life regression, there would probably be world peace, because we would know that we've been all of these things. And so it's important to keep that in mind. I do all the time. And I would say what you were talking about in terms of our soul pod or our soul squad, I think it'd be interesting for you to talk about what happened after we left. So that was on a Friday. And one of the things that Michelle said to us was, you may be still having certain images and experiences for the next few days, which Karen definitely did.
So at night we got home.
We got back and we just started researching, because the fact that you knew that you were part of this Arapaho tribe, we were able, and when you said Colorado to Wyoming and the massacre,
almost down to like, we think we might have even found the person that
we do.
So I had goosebumps.
Me too.
So that's fascinating. And that could be a whole nother show in itself. The day after that, the Sunday, Robyn was here the weekend, and we did a lot of great work. But the Sunday that she was getting ready to leave, I had done my morning meditation. You were packing up your suitcase, and I had these flashes of 2 past lives that I had seen before, that I knew I had before. I don't know if they came to me in dreams or visions. First one was I was on a train. I was young. I was probably no older than 10 years old. And it was really cold. There was snow everywhere. And I don't know if I was pushed out of the train by like someone or jumped, but I was with a sibling. And as we tumbled to the ground, I knew we were tumbling out of a train that was going to a concentration camp. And I believe that I was pushed by my parent, my mother, to just hopefully get away and be safe. But I also knew that my sibling and I froze in the snow and that we didn't make it. But that my role in that at that moment was try to protect that sibling that I was with. The second one was another memory of a lifetime where I was on a ship that was sinking in the ocean, obviously. And it was maybe in the 1600s. It was a long time ago, like Mayflower-ish time frame. And I had a baby and it was nighttime, and again, jumped out of the ship knowing that it was going under. This baby and I drowned. So I've always had those in my mind, and they flashed in my mind that Sunday morning. And I realized that the person that I was trying to save in both of those situations was Robyn. I was certain. At that moment, that was the lesson for me to learn, is that there is that connection that you and I have and that we've had over many lifetimes.
Yes. We're so drawn together for a reason and feel like we've known each other forever. It was so powerful and meaningful. And that Sunday morning, I could feel that. And then when you said that to me, we both just wept.
because truth, it's truth.
Yes.
You just know. There's just something that your soul tells you. It's truth. It's not the words. It's not the vision of it. It's what you feel on a soul level. And again, tell us the story of how we are all connected, but we come back with these pods or these squads of people because they are our family, and we are here to continually learn from each other. So it was so magical to have that open up for me.
All of that has changed our lives, and I think that is how, when we talk about life-changing experiences, it was. And it was beautiful, and it wasn't scary, and it only helps us as we go forward with the hope that other people will experience and have similar moments that help define and or validate what's going on and guide them.
That's so true. I mean, we were fortunate in the sense that we were not trying to discover the root of a fear, which past life regression can help you find. But instead, we were given this opportunity to really see how we're connected. God, I love telling that story. I love reliving that story.
Oh my God. Well, and every time we talk about it and something new comes out of it.
Going back to what we're doing, if all of these are little bits of our story, right? It's the story of our past. It's the story of our astrological makeup. It's the story of our energy. It's the story of how our loved ones are still with us from the other side. I mean, every time we go through one of these modalities, it opens up our world even more than before.
It opens it up and continues to validate. That's what it does every time. Love you.
You too. Love you. Bye.
Bye.